Black woman slept on the flight until the captain cried in fear, "Any doctor on board? We need a real doctor, not a nurse. Is there an actual physician on board? I am Dr. Eleanor Washington, Chief of Cardiology at Mass General. Now please step aside so I can save this man's life." The first-class cabin fell silent. All eyes fixed on the confrontation unfolding in the narrow aisle of Flight 287 to Atlanta. Eleanor Washington stood firm, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, her gaze unwavering as she faced the flight attendant who had just questioned her credentials. Behind them, a man in his 60s lay slumped in his seat, his skin ashen, breathing labored. His wife clutched his hand, terror etched across her face. "His pulse is weak and irregular," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the turbulence that occasionally jolted the aircraft. She placed her stethoscope against the man's chest. "I need the emergency medical kit. Now." The flight attendant hesitated, looking Eleanor up and down, taking in her simple cotton blouse, comfortable slacks, and worn leather loafers, not the appearance of a prestigious doctor, at least not in her mind. "Ma'am, every second counts," Eleanor cut in. "This man is having a heart attack." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, tension evident even through the static. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a medical emergency on board. If there are any doctors—" "I'm here," Eleanor called out loud enough for her voice to carry to the cockpit. "I'm a cardiologist. Get me the AED and emergency kit immediately." The flight attendant finally rushed to retrieve the medical equipment as murmurs rippled through the cabin. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit 2 rows back stood up. "I'm a dermatologist," he offered. "Can I assist?" Eleanor nodded briskly. "I need you to help me lay him flat in the aisle." As they carefully moved the patient, his wife sobbed. "Gerald, please don't leave me." Eleanor checked his carotid pulse again, weaker now. His lips were turning blue. "We're 20 minutes from the nearest airport," the captain announced, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Charleston International. They'll have emergency services waiting." "He doesn't have 20 minutes, Eleanor whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She looked up at the anxious faces surrounding her. "I need to start treatment now." But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Eleanor Washington rushed through Logan International Airport, pulling her carry-on suitcase behind her. Eleanor Washington had never been late for anything in her life. Not for school, not for her medical board exams, and certainly not for a flight to her only daughter's wedding. Yet here she was, racing through Boston's Logan Airport at 67 years old, her sensible shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "Final boarding call for Flight 287 to Atlanta," the announcement blared overhead. I'm coming," she muttered to herself, weaving between slower travelers with the skill of someone who had spent decades navigating hospital hallways. Eleanor had spent the morning finishing rounds at Massachusetts General Hospital, where she'd served as chief of cardiology for the past 15 years. An emergency consultation had run long, a young father with an alarming arrhythmia, and she couldn't bring herself to leave until she was certain he was stabilized. "Dr. Washington, I insist you go," her colleague Dr. Chen had finally said. "Melissa's wedding is tomorrow. I'll handle Mr. Abernathy's case." Now, as she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, Eleanor felt the familiar twist of guilt. Work before family again. The story of her life, as her daughter Melissa had pointed out during their last phone call. "You'll make it just in time for the rehearsal dinner, Mom, right?" Melissa had asked, a note of resignation in her voice that Eleanor pretended not to hear. "Absolutely, sweetheart, I wouldn't miss it." The gate agent scanned her boarding pass and smiled. "We're about to close the door, Dr. Washington. You made it just in time." Eleanor hurried down the jet bridge, her mind still half at the hospital. By the time she stepped onto the plane, most passengers were already seated, some eyeing her with mild irritation as the cause of their delayed departure. "Right this way, ma'am," the flight attendant said, guiding her toward the back of the plane. Eleanor settled into her window seat in economy, wedged her small carry-on beneath the seat in front, and exhaled deeply. For the first time in weeks, she had nothing to do but sit still for the 2-hour flight. No patients to check on, no medical journals to review, no hospital politics to navigate. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she closed her eyes. The events of the past few months played through her mind like a worn VHS tape. Melissa's engagement announcement, the flurry of wedding plans, the pointed comments about how Eleanor might find more time for family if she finally considered retirement. "Can I get you something to drink once we're in the air?" The question came from a flight attendant with a name tag that read Diane. "Just water, please," Eleanor replied, "and maybe a pillow if you have one." "Of course." Diane smiled, the practiced smile of someone who had been in customer service for decades. First time to Atlanta. No, my daughter lives there. She's getting married tomorrow. How wonderful. Congratulations. Eleanor nodded politely, hoping to end the conversation. She was exhausted, having been on her feet since 4:30 that morning. The plane lifted off, and Eleanor felt the familiar pressure in her ears. She hadn't always been afraid of flying, but ever since Robert's death 8 years ago, she'd found herself gripping the armrests during takeoff and landing. Robert had always held her hand during those moments. Once they reached cruising altitude, Eleanor reclined her seat slightly and closed her eyes. Just a short nap, she told herself. Just enough to be refreshed for Melissa. She was nearly asleep when a voice from across the aisle caught her attention. "Excuse me, do I know you?" an elderly man asked, leaning slightly toward her. Eleanor opened her eyes and glanced over. The man was perhaps in his early 70s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Something about him did seem vaguely familiar. "I'm not sure," she replied, straightening in her seat. "You're Dr. Washington, aren't you?" Eleanor Washington from Mass General. Now she studied him more carefully. "Yes, that's right." The man's face broke into a wide smile. "I thought so. I'm Gerald Thompson. You saved my brother Richard's life about 5 years ago, aortic dissection. The family still talks about how you came in on your day off to perform the surgery." Recognition dawned on Eleanor. "Mr. Thompson, of course. How is Richard doing?" "Couldn't be better, running around with his grandkids like a man half his age." Gerald gestured to the woman sleeping beside him. "This is my wife, Patricia. We're heading to Atlanta to visit our son and his family." Patricia stirred slightly but didn't wake. "Let her rest," Eleanor said softly. "Long day of travel," Gerald nodded. "We had a connection through Boston from Portland, Maine. Patricia never sleeps well the night before flying, too anxious." "I understand that," Eleanor said, thinking of her own white-knuckled takeoffs. "Are you still working full-time?" Gerald asked. "Most of my friends have retired by now, but you doctors seem to keep going forever." Eleanor smiled. "Full-time and then some. It's hard to step back when you love what you do." "I was the same way before I retired. Owned a small printing business for 40 years. Started in '69 with just a single press in my garage. By the time I sold it in 2010, we had 30 employees and clients all over New England." They continued chatting, and Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Gerald reminded her of her late husband, that same mixture of warmth and quiet intelligence. "What brings you to Atlanta?" Gerald asked after a while. "My daughter's wedding tomorrow evening." "Wonderful, first child to get married?" "Only child," Eleanor corrected. "Melissa, she's 38, a professor at Emory University." "Ah, smart like her mother," Gerald nodded approvingly. "Patricia and I have 3 all boys. Our youngest is 42 now, can you believe it? Where does the time go?" Eleanor felt the familiar pang that always accompanied thoughts of Melissa's childhood, how quickly it had passed, how many moments she'd missed while building her career. "It goes too fast," she agreed. Their conversation was interrupted by Diane returning with drinks. Eleanor accepted her water gratefully and took a small sip. "Would either of you care for pretzels or cookies?" Diane asked. "No, thank you," Eleanor replied. "I'll take the pretzels," Gerald said, "and Patricia will want cookies when she wakes up." After Diane moved on, Gerald lowered his voice. "My doctor says I should avoid salt, but what he doesn't know won't hurt him, right?" He winked. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "As a doctor, I feel obligated to tell you to listen to your physician's advice. And as a human being," she smiled. "I'd say one small bag of pretzels on a flight probably won't be your downfall." Gerald chuckled and tore open the pretzel bag. "So tell me, Dr. Washington, what was it like breaking into cardiology back when you started? Can't have been easy." Eleanor considered the question. Few people asked her about that time in her life anymore. "It wasn't," she admitted. "I was often the only woman in the room and almost always the only black woman. When I started my residency in 1982, one of the attending physicians mistook me for a nurse every day for 2 weeks, despite my white coat and name badge that clearly said Dr. Washington." Gerald shook his head. "My sister went through something similar. She became an engineer in the late 70s, said she had to work twice as hard to be considered half as good." "That sounds about right," Eleanor nodded. "But I was lucky to have good mentors. And my husband Robert was incredibly supportive. He adjusted his teaching schedule to be home with Melissa when I couldn't be." "What did he teach?" "American history at Boston University. He specialized in the civil rights movement, actually wrote a well-regarded book about the Freedom Riders." "I might have read that," Gerald said. "Thompson, no, Washington. Journey to Justice?" Eleanor felt a surge of pride. "Yes, that's the one. It came out in '93. Brilliant book." I used excerpts in my company's newsletter during Black History Month for years. Your husband had a real gift for bringing history to life. He did, Eleanor agreed, touched that this stranger knew Robert's work. He passed away 8 years ago, heart attack, ironically enough. She gave a sad smile. I was at a medical conference in Chicago, couldn't get back in time. Gerald reached across the aisle and briefly patted her hand. I'm sorry. Thank you. Eleanor took another sip of water. What about you and Patricia? How long have you been married? 51 years next month, Gerald replied with evident pride. Met during the summer of '72 at a James Taylor concert in Central Park. Impressive milestone, Eleanor said. Any secrets to success? Gerald glanced fondly at his sleeping wife. Communication, compromise, and separate bathrooms once we could afford it. He laughed softly. But mostly, it's about choosing each other every day, even when it's not easy. Eleanor nodded, thinking about her own marriage, how she and Robert had made it work despite her demanding career and long hours. She was about to respond when she noticed Gerald wince slightly and press a hand to his chest. Are you all right? She asked, her doctor's instincts immediately alert. Fine, fine, Gerald assured her. Just a bit of heartburn, had some spicy food at the airport. Eleanor studied him with a professional eye. He didn't appear to be in severe distress, but something about his expression concerned her. How long has it been bothering you? Started about an hour ago, comes and goes. He took a small sip of his ginger ale. Don't worry, doctor, I've had acid reflux for years. Any other symptoms? Shortness of breath, pain radiating to your arm or jaw? Gerald chuckled. Are you officially on duty now? Old habits, Eleanor smiled but kept her eyes on him. Just humor me. No arm or jaw pain, Gerald assured her. Just the usual burning feeling here. He patted his sternum. I forgot to take my Pepsid this morning with all the rush to catch our connection. Eleanor relaxed slightly but made a mental note to check on him again before they landed. In her experience, too many heart attacks were dismissed as indigestion, especially among men of Gerald's generation who tended to downplay their symptoms. Let me know if it gets worse, she said. Gerald nodded and settled back in his seat. I think I'll try to nap a bit too, been up since dawn. Eleanor closed her eyes again, listening to the steady hum of the engines. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her now. Her mind drifted to the wedding tomorrow, to Melissa. Their relationship had been strained in recent years. Melissa never said it outright, but Eleanor knew her daughter resented the many school plays and soccer games she'd missed, the birthday parties cut short by emergency calls, the family vacations rescheduled around medical conferences. You always choose your patients over me, Melissa had said during their last significant argument, 3 years ago at Christmas. The words had stung because there was truth in them. Eleanor had dedicated her life to saving others, believing that was what mattered most. Only in recent years had she begun to question whether the balance she'd struck had been the right one. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting Eleanor from her thoughts. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. Folks, we're experiencing some light chop as we pass through a weather system. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts until we're through this rough patch. Eleanor glanced over at Gerald and Patricia. Patricia had awoken and was gripping the armrests tightly, her face pale. Gerald was patting her hand reassuringly, but Eleanor noticed he was still occasionally pressing his other hand to his chest, his brow furrowed. Just some bumps, Gerald was telling Patricia. Nothing to worry about, dear. The turbulence intensified. Diane and the other flight attendants hurried to secure the beverage carts. A baby started crying somewhere in the back of the plane. Eleanor had just tightened her seatbelt when she heard a gasp from across the aisle. She turned to see Gerald clutching his chest more firmly now, his face contorted in pain. Gerald, Patricia's voice rose in panic. Gerald, what's wrong? Eleanor was out of her seat instantly, seatbelt sign be damned. She crossed the aisle in one step and knelt beside Gerald's seat. Gerald, look at me, she commanded, her voice calm but authoritative. Are you having chest pain? He nodded, unable to speak. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Eleanor took his wrist, checking his pulse, rapid and irregular. Patricia, Eleanor said, looking at Gerald's frightened wife, I need you to press the call button for the flight attendant. Tell them we have a medical emergency. As Patricia fumbled for the button, Eleanor continued her assessment. Gerald, I'm going to loosen your collar. Try to take slow, deep breaths if you can. His skin was clammy to the touch. Eleanor recognized the signs immediately. This was no case of heartburn. Diane appeared beside them, steadying herself against the seat as the plane continued to bounce through turbulence. What's happening? She asked, taking in the scene. This man is having a cardiac event, Eleanor said firmly. I'm a cardiologist. I need your emergency medical kit and AED immediately, and please inform the captain we may need to divert. Diane's eyes widened, but her professional training kicked in. Right away, doctor. As Diane hurried toward the front of the aircraft, Eleanor turned to Patricia. Has Gerald had heart problems before? Does he take any medications? He has high blood pressure, Patricia replied, her voice shaking. And high cholesterol. He takes, oh God, I can't remember the names. It's okay, Eleanor assured her. Does he have a history of heart attacks or angina? No, nothing like that, just the hypertension. His doctor said his heart was strong at his last checkup 6 months ago. Gerald was breathing with difficulty now, his face ashen. Eleanor wished she had her stethoscope. In her rush to make the flight, she'd packed it in her checked luggage rather than her carry-on. Help is coming, she told him, maintaining eye contact. Try to stay calm. The plane suddenly dropped several feet, causing several passengers to cry out. The turbulence was getting worse. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came over the intercom, sounding tense. We're experiencing stronger turbulence than anticipated. All passengers and flight attendants must return to their seats immediately and ensure seatbelts are fastened securely. Diane reappeared, clutching the emergency medical kit and portable defibrillator. The captain says we can't divert due to severe weather systems surrounding us. We're approximately 1 hour from Atlanta. Eleanor made a quick decision. We move him to the front where there's more space. Despite the turbulence, Diane nodded. First class has some empty seats. We can lay him flat across a row. Together with another flight attendant who had joined them, they carefully helped Gerald to his feet. He was conscious but clearly in severe pain, leaning heavily on Eleanor. Patricia, Eleanor called over her shoulder as they slowly made their way forward. Bring his medications if you have them. The plane lurched again as they reached first class. Gerald groaned. Almost there, Eleanor encouraged him. They helped him into a row with 3 empty seats where he could lie down. Eleanor opened the medical kit as the flight attendants cleared the surrounding area as much as possible. She found a stethoscope and quickly placed it on Gerald's chest, listening intently despite the background noise of the engines and anxious passengers. His heart rhythm was dangerously irregular. She checked his blood pressure using the kit's sphygmomanometer, dangerously high. I need to start an IV, she told Diane, and I need to know what medications are available in this kit. As Diane listed the contents, Eleanor considered her options. Limited as she'd expected, but there were basic cardiac medications that might help stabilize him until they landed. The plane finally broke free of the turbulence, settling into smoother air. The captain made another announcement, his voice slightly calmer now. Ladies and gentlemen, we've cleared the worst of the turbulence. However, we have a medical situation on board. If there are any other physicians among our passengers, please identify yourself to the flight attendants. Patricia arrived with Gerald's pill case. He takes lisinopril for his blood pressure and atorvastatin for cholesterol, she said, her hands trembling as she handed the case to Eleanor. And a baby aspirin each morning. That's helpful, thank you, Eleanor said, noting that these matched her suspicions based on his history. She administered aspirin from the emergency kit first, then set up an IV line with practiced ease. Her hands remained steady even as her mind raced through possible complications. Without the ability to perform an ECG or other diagnostic tests, she was working largely on clinical experience and instinct. Gerald, she said, leaning close to him, I believe you're having a heart attack. I'm going to give you medication to help, but we need to get you to a hospital as soon as possible. Gerald managed a weak nod. Never thought it would feel like this, he gasped. Try not to talk, Eleanor advised. Focus on your breathing. A well-dressed man approached from further up in first class. I'm Dr. Lawrence Bennett, he said. Dermatologist, can I be of assistance? Dr. Eleanor Washington, Cardiology, she replied without looking up from Gerald. If you could help monitor his vital signs while I prepare this nitroglycerin, that would be helpful. Dr. Bennett nodded and took Gerald's wrist to check his pulse. For the next 40 minutes, Eleanor worked steadily to stabilize Gerald. His condition wavered, sometimes seeming to improve, then deteriorating again. The limited medications in the emergency kit weren't enough to fully address what she suspected was a major cardiac event. How much longer until we land? Eleanor asked Diane, who had been assisting throughout. The captain says about 20 minutes. They've given us priority landing status, and there will be paramedics waiting at the gate. He needs to hold on just a bit longer, Eleanor said softly, more to herself than anyone else. She turned back to Gerald, whose breathing had become more labored. His skin had taken on a bluish tinge, and his pulse was growing weaker. Patricia sat across the aisle, tears streaming down her face as she watched. Eleanor had asked Dr. Bennett to keep her informed, but also to ensure she didn't get in the way of their emergency care. "Talk to him," Eleanor suggested to Patricia. "Let him hear your voice, it helps." Patricia nodded and began speaking softly to her husband, reminding him of their children and grandchildren waiting for them in Atlanta, of the cruise they had planned for their anniversary, of all the reasons he needed to fight. Then, suddenly, Gerald's body went rigid. His eyes rolled back. "He's seizing," Eleanor called out. "Dr. Bennett, help me turn him on his side." Together they managed to position Gerald to prevent him from aspirating if he vomited. The seizure lasted about 30 seconds before his body went limp. Eleanor immediately checked for a pulse. Nothing. "He's in cardiac arrest," she announced, her voice sharp. "I need the AED now." As Diane rushed to bring the defibrillator, Eleanor began chest compressions. Dr. Bennett leaned in to assist. "I can take over compressions when you need a break," he offered. Eleanor nodded, focusing on maintaining the proper rhythm and depth. In the periphery of her awareness, she could hear Patricia sobbing and the anxious murmurs of other passengers. None of that mattered now. There was only Gerald and the desperate fight to restart his heart. The AED arrived. Eleanor attached the pads to Gerald's chest as Dr. Bennett continued compressions. "Stand clear," she commanded once the device was ready to analyze Gerald's heart rhythm. Everyone backed away. The AED's robotic voice announced, "Shock advised." "Clear," Eleanor called again, ensuring no one was touching Gerald or the seats he was lying across. She pressed the button to deliver the shock. Gerald's body jerked slightly. Eleanor immediately checked for a pulse. Still nothing. "Resume CPR," she instructed, and Dr. Bennett continued chest compressions. They repeated this cycle: compressions, shock, check for pulse 2 more times. The plane had begun its descent into Atlanta, the change in pressure making Eleanor's ears pop painfully. After the 3rd shock, Eleanor felt a faint pulse at Gerald's carotid artery, weak but present. "We have a pulse," she announced. "Keep him stable during landing." The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing. Medical personnel, please secure your patient as best you can while remaining seated for landing." Eleanor and Dr. Bennett worked quickly to secure Gerald as safely as possible. They couldn't return him to a regular seat, so they padded around him with pillows and blankets to prevent him from sliding during landing. Eleanor remained kneeling beside him, bracing herself against the seats. "I'm staying with my patient," she told Diane when the flight attendant suggested she return to her seat. Plane descended rapidly, finally touching down with a jarring thud. As they taxied to the gate, Eleanor continued to monitor Gerald, whose pulse remained thready but present. "We're here, Gerald," she told him, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "Help is coming." As promised, paramedics boarded the moment the aircraft door opened. Eleanor briefed them quickly and professionally on Gerald's condition and the treatment she'd administered. Suspected myocardial infarction progressing to cardiac. Patient received 3 shocks from the AED after going into VFib. Currently has a pulse but remains critical. The paramedics efficiently transferred Gerald onto a stretcher. Patricia followed close behind, clutching her purse and Gerald's jacket. "Dr. Washington," she said, pausing before following the stretcher. "You're coming too, aren't you?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing at her watch. The rehearsal dinner for Melissa's wedding started in 3 hours. One of the paramedics looked at Eleanor. "Are you the treating physician? We could use your help with continuity of care." In that moment, Eleanor made a decision. "Yes, I'll come with you." As they rushed through the terminal, Eleanor pulled out her phone and quickly dialed Melissa's number. "Mom, are you in Atlanta?" Melissa answered on the 2nd ring. "Yes, I just landed," Eleanor replied, hurrying alongside the stretcher. "But there's been a situation. A man had a heart attack on the plane. I've been treating him and I need to go with him to the hospital." There was a brief silence on the other end. "So you're going to miss the rehearsal dinner," Melissa finally said, her voice flat. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. This man could die without proper care. I'll try to make it if I can, but your patient comes first, as always." The resignation in Melissa's voice was worse than anger would have been. "I understand. It's who you are." Melissa, but her daughter had already hung up. Eleanor swallowed hard and continued following the paramedics. As they loaded Gerald into the ambulance, Patricia climbed in beside him. Eleanor followed. "Grady Memorial Hospital," the paramedic told the driver. "Cardiac team is standing by." As the ambulance sped through Atlanta traffic, sirens blaring, Eleanor held Gerald's wrist, monitoring his pulse. Patricia sat opposite her, her eyes never leaving her husband's face. "Will he make it?" Patricia asked in a small voice. Eleanor looked at the woman, married 51 years, probably rarely separated from her husband for more than a few days at a time. A lifetime built together. "He's fighting hard," Eleanor said honestly. and he'll get the best possible care at Grady. It's an excellent hospital." The paramedic beside them was adjusting Gerald's oxygen mask. "Pulse is stabilizing," he reported. "BP still low, but improving." They arrived at the emergency entrance within minutes. A team was waiting as the doors swung open. Eleanor helped transfer Gerald onto the hospital gurney and followed as they rushed him inside, continuing her report to the attending cardiologist who met them. "Dr. Washington, is it?" The cardiologist, Dr. Patel according to his ID badge, asked as they moved swiftly through the corridors. "We've got it from here if you need to go." Eleanor glanced at Patricia, who was struggling to keep up, her face a mask of fear and exhaustion. "I'll stay," Eleanor decided. "At least until he's stabilized." Dr. Patel nodded appreciatively. "Could use another set of experienced hands." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Gerald was taken immediately for an emergency catheterization, which confirmed Eleanor's suspicion of a major blockage in his left anterior descending artery, often called the widowmaker. The surgical team inserted a stent to restore blood flow. Eleanor observed the procedure, offering her insights when asked, but otherwise staying out of the way of the hospital team. When it was complete, Dr. Patel approached her in the hallway outside the catheterization lab. "Good call on the plane," he said. "Without your intervention, he wouldn't have made it to us alive." "He's stable now?" Dr. Patel nodded. "He's not out of the woods, but the prognosis is cautiously positive. The quick action minimized heart damage." Eleanor checked her watch. The rehearsal dinner had started 30 minutes ago. If she left now and took a taxi, she might make it for the last hour. She walked to the waiting room where Patricia sat surrounded by 3 men who must be her sons, judging by the strong family resemblance. "Patricia," Eleanor said gently. The older woman looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Dr. Washington, how is he?" "He's stable," Eleanor assured her. "They successfully placed a stent to open the blocked artery. He's in recovery now." The eldest son stood and extended his hand. "Dr. Washington, I'm David Thompson, my brothers Michael and Stephen," he gestured to the other men. "We cannot thank you enough for saving our father's life." "Your father is receiving excellent care here," Eleanor replied, shaking each man's hand in turn. "Dr. Patel is one of the best, but if you hadn't been on that plane—" Michael's voice trailed off. Eleanor nodded, understanding what was left unsaid. "I'm just glad I was there to help." "Mom said you're missing your daughter's wedding rehearsal to be here," Stephen said. "We don't want to keep you." "The actual wedding is tomorrow," Eleanor clarified. "But yes, there is a dinner tonight." Patricia reached out and took Eleanor's hand. "Go to your daughter, Dr. Washington. You've done more than enough for us. We'll never forget it." Eleanor hesitated. "You'll be allowed to see Gerald soon. I could stay until then." "Please," Patricia insisted. "Family should come first." Gerald would say the same if he were awake to say it. The words struck Eleanor deeply. Family should come first. How many times had she told herself that, even as she made decisions that put her patients ahead of Melissa and Robert? "Thank you," Eleanor said finally. "I'll check in tomorrow morning if I can." She gathered her carry-on, which a kind flight attendant had brought to the hospital, and called a taxi. As she waited outside the emergency entrance, she dialed Melissa again. "Mom." Melissa sounded surprised to hear from her. "Are you still at the hospital?" "I'm just leaving," Eleanor replied. "The patient is stable. If the taxi comes quickly, I might make the end of the dinner." "Don't rush," Melissa said, her tone softer than before. "The important thing is that you're helping someone who needed you." "I always seem to be helping someone who isn't you," Eleanor said, the words escaping before she could stop them. There was a pause on the line. "Mom, I'm sorry, that wasn't fair. I want you to know I'm trying to be there for you this weekend. This was an unusual circumstance." "I know," Melissa sighed. "And honestly, I would have been disappointed if you'd abandoned a man having a heart attack to come to a dinner. That wouldn't be the mother who taught me to care about others." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'll see you soon," she promised. The taxi arrived, and Eleanor gave the driver the address of the restaurant. As they pulled away from the hospital, she leaned back against the seat, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the emergency was fading, leaving her drained. But there was something else too, a sense of purpose renewed. Today had reminded her why she became a doctor in the first place, not for prestige or accolades, but to be there in moments when she could make a difference between life and death. The taxi driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Long day." Eleanor nodded. "Very. You a doctor?" he asked, nodding toward the stethoscope she'd absently hung around her neck after leaving the hospital. "Yes, cardiologist. My father had a heart attack last year," the driver shared. "Doctor like you saved his life. I've been taking him to his checkups ever since, making sure he eats right too, though he complains about my cooking." Eleanor smiled. "The complaints are a good sign, means he's feeling well enough to have opinions." The driver laughed. That's exactly what his doctor says. They continued chatting as the taxi navigated through Atlanta's evening traffic. By the time they reached the restaurant, Eleanor felt rejuvenated by the simple human connection. The rehearsal dinner was being held in a private room of an upscale southern restaurant. Eleanor could hear laughter as she approached the doorway. She paused for a moment, straightening her blouse and smoothing her hair. When she entered, Melissa spotted her immediately. Her daughter excused herself from the table where she'd been sitting with her fiancé, James, and his parents and hurried over. "Mom," Melissa embraced her tightly, "you made it." "I'm so sorry I'm late," Eleanor began. Melissa shook her head. "Don't apologize. James's cousin is an ER nurse." She explained how critical those first hours are after a heart attack. "How is your patient doing?" "Stable," Eleanor replied, touched by Melissa's genuine concern. "They placed a stent and he's in recovery." "I'm glad." Melissa linked her arm through Eleanor's. "Come meet everyone properly, and you must be starving. I had them save you a plate." As Eleanor was introduced around the room, she was struck by the warmth of James's family. His mother, Vivian, was particularly welcoming. "Melissa has told us so much about you," Vivian said as they sat together. "She's incredibly proud of your work." "She is." Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. "Of course," Vivian nodded. "Just yesterday she was telling us about that research paper you published last year, something about predicting heart failure risk more accurately. She said it could save thousands of lives." Eleanor felt a rush of emotion. She hadn't realized Melissa followed her professional achievements so closely. The evening continued pleasantly, with Eleanor gradually relaxing into the celebration. When dessert was served, a preview of tomorrow's wedding cake, James's father stood to make a toast. "To Melissa and James," he raised his glass. "And to family, both the ones we're born to and the ones we choose. May we always be there for each other in all the ways that matter." Eleanor caught Melissa's eye across the table. Her daughter smiled warmly, and Eleanor felt something shift between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. After the dinner, as guests began to depart, Melissa pulled Eleanor aside. "Stay with me tonight at the hotel instead of getting your own room," she suggested. "We could have breakfast together in the morning before all the wedding madness begins." "I'd like that," Eleanor agreed, "but I was hoping to stop by the hospital first to check on Mr. Thompson." Instead of the disappointment Eleanor expected, Melissa nodded. "We could go together if you want, before breakfast." "You wouldn't mind?" "Of course not." Melissa squeezed her mother's hand. "It's important to you, so it's important to me." As they walked out to James's car, he would drive them both to the hotel. Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps there was a way to balance her calling as a physician with her role as a mother. Perhaps it wasn't too late to find that balance. The next morning, Eleanor and Melissa arrived at Grady Memorial Hospital just as visiting hours began. They made their way to the cardiac care unit where a nurse directed them to Gerald's room. When they entered, they found Patricia dozing in a chair beside the bed. Gerald was awake, looking pale but alert, an IV in his arm and monitoring equipment surrounding him. "Dr. Washington," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than Eleanor had expected. Patricia startled awake at the sound of his voice. "Eleanor, you came back." "I wanted to see how you were doing," Eleanor replied, approaching the bed. She introduced Melissa, explaining that it was her wedding day. "And you're here instead of getting ready?" Gerald asked, looking genuinely concerned. "We have plenty of time," Melissa assured him. "The ceremony isn't until 5. The doctors say I wouldn't be alive if not for your mother," Gerald told Melissa. "You must be very proud of her." "I am," Melissa said, glancing at Eleanor with clear admiration. "She's always been amazing in a crisis." Eleanor felt herself flush slightly at the praise. "How are you feeling, Gerald?" "Like someone parked a truck on my chest," he admitted with a weak smile. "But better than yesterday." Eleanor checked his chart, which hung at the foot of the bed. His vitals had stabilized impressively overnight. "The stent is doing its job," she observed. "Your numbers look good." "Dr. Patel said I should make a full recovery," Gerald added, "though he's prescribed quite a lifestyle change. Patricia is already planning to throw out all the bacon in the house." "And the salt," Patricia added firmly. "Small prices to pay," Eleanor said, replacing the chart. "Dr. Washington," Gerald said, suddenly serious, "I don't know how to thank you." "Seeing you recovering is thanks enough," she replied sincerely. "No," Gerald shook his head slightly. "It's more than that. Patricia and I have been together for 51 years. We've built a life, a family. Because of you, we still have time together." His eyes glistened with tears. "There's no greater gift than that." Eleanor nodded, her own eyes growing moist. "Take care of each other," she said softly. "That's all the thanks I need." As she and Melissa prepared to leave, Patricia hugged Eleanor tightly. You'll always be part of our family now, she whispered. Outside in the corridor, Melissa linked arms with her mother. She's right, you gave them a priceless gift, more time together. It's what I've always tried to do, Eleanor reflected. Give people more time. They walked in companionable silence toward the hospital exit. Just before they reached the doors, Melissa stopped. Mom, I need to tell you something. Her expression was earnest. For a long time, I resented how much time you gave to your patients instead of to me. I felt like I was always second priority. Eleanor started to respond, but Melissa held up a hand. Please let me finish. I didn't understand then what I understand now, that what you do matters deeply, that the time you give others is precious beyond measure. She took a deep breath. Seeing you with Gerald and Patricia, hearing how you saved his life on that plane, I'm not just proud to be your daughter, I'm grateful for who you are. Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. Oh, Melissa, I've always worried that I failed you by not being present enough. You were present in all the ways that shaped who I am, Melissa said firmly. You taught me compassion and dedication by example. You showed me what it means to live with purpose. They embraced there in the hospital hallway, holding each other tightly. But, Melissa added as they separated, wiping tears from her eyes, I would like more brunches and phone calls in the future. Eleanor laughed. That I can definitely manage. As they walked out into the bright Atlanta morning, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. For decades, she had straddled two worlds, her professional calling and her family life, never quite feeling she was doing justice to either. But today, those worlds had harmoniously intersected. What are you thinking about? Melissa asked as they got into the waiting taxi. Eleanor smiled. I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I need to be. Hours later, as Eleanor watched her daughter walk down the aisle toward James, she reflected on the strange series of events that had brought her to this moment. How a delayed flight, a chance encounter with a former patient's brother, and a medical emergency had somehow helped heal the strained relationship between her and Melissa. Life was unpredictable that way. As a doctor, Eleanor had always focused on the crisis at hand, the failing heart, the blocked artery, the immediate need. But sometimes the most important healing happened in the quiet moments afterward, in the connections formed and the understanding reached. After the ceremony, during the reception, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dr. Patel at Grady Memorial. Thought you'd want to know Gerald Thompson making excellent progress, going home in 2-3 days. His family can't stop talking about the guardian angel doctor on the plane. Eleanor smiled and slipped the phone back into her purse just as the DJ announced the mother-daughter dance. Melissa appeared at her side, radiant in her wedding gown. Ready, Mom. As they moved onto the dance floor together, Eleanor thought about Gerald and Patricia, about the 51 years they'd shared and the additional years they would now have because of a fortunate coincidence. That on Flight 287 to Atlanta, a cardiologist had been in the right place at the right time. But it wasn't just Gerald whose life had been saved on that flight. In a way, Eleanor's relationship with her daughter had been saved too, given a second chance, a new understanding, more time. As the music played and they swayed together, Eleanor whispered, I love you, Melissa. I love you too, Mom, Melissa replied, and I'm so glad you were on that flight yesterday. So am I, Eleanor said. So am I. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. Now back to where we started. We need a real doctor, not a nurse. Is there an actual physician on board? I am Dr. Eleanor Washington, Chief of Cardiology at Mass General. Now please step aside so I can save this man's life. The first-class cabin fell silent as Eleanor Washington took command of the situation. With calm efficiency, she requested the emergency medical kit and began treatment. Gerald's condition deteriorated rapidly, eventually leading to cardiac arrest, but Eleanor's expertise and quick thinking kept him alive until they could land in Charleston. As the paramedics wheeled Gerald off the plane, Patricia grasped Eleanor's hand. You have to come with us, she pleaded. I don't trust anyone else. Eleanor looked at her watch. Melissa's rehearsal dinner would begin soon. If she went to the hospital, she would miss it entirely. Of course I'll come, she said without hesitation. He's my patient now. At the hospital, while Gerald underwent emergency surgery, Eleanor called Melissa to explain her absence. I understand, Mom, Melissa said, her voice warmer than Eleanor had expected. You're doing what you need to do. What you've always done. I'll make it up to you, Eleanor promised. I know you will, Melissa replied, and Mom, I'm proud of you. Those words stayed with Eleanor through the night as she monitored Gerald's recovery. By morning, he was stable enough that she felt comfortable leaving for Atlanta to attend Melissa's wedding. Before departing, she visited Gerald's room one last time. He was awake, pale but alert. Dr. Washington, he said weakly. My family told me what you did. How can I ever think? Eleanor smiled. Live well, Gerald. Enjoy every day with Patricia and your family. That's all the thanks I need. As she left the hospital, Eleanor reflected on the strange twist of fate that had placed her on that particular flight. If she hadn't been delayed at the hospital, if she hadn't chosen that seat, if Gerald hadn't recognized her, any small change might have led to a different outcome. She arrived in Atlanta just in time to help Melissa prepare for the ceremony. As they stood together in the bridal suite, Melissa embraced her mother tightly. You know, Melissa said, when I was growing up, I used to resent sharing you with your patients. I didn't understand then what I understand now, that what you do matters, that you save lives. Including mine, Eleanor replied softly. Because being here with you today, seeing the woman you've become, that's what gives my life meaning. When Eleanor walked her daughter down the aisle later that day, she felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. The two halves of her life, her calling as a doctor and her love as a mother, no longer seemed in conflict but in harmony. 6 months later, Eleanor returned to Boston after attending a medical conference. In her mail was a large envelope from Atlanta. Inside was a photograph of Gerald and Patricia Thompson surrounded by their children and grandchildren at their 52nd wedding anniversary celebration. On the back, Patricia had written, "All possible because of you, our family's guardian angel." Eleanor placed the photo on her desk at Mass General, next to a picture of Melissa on her wedding day. Two images that reminded her daily of why her work mattered, because it gave people more time with those they loved. And in the end, isn't that what we all truly want? More time to love, to share, to connect. More time to make a difference in the lives of others. More time to be fully present for the moments that matter most. That night, Eleanor called Melissa. "I was thinking," she said when her daughter answered, "it might be time for me to cut back my hours at the hospital, maybe train someone else to take over as department chair." "Really?" Melissa sounded surprised. "But you love your work." "I do," Eleanor agreed. "But I love you more, and I'd like to have more time for brunches and phone calls, maybe even a visit to Atlanta once a month." "I'd like that too, Mom," Melissa said, her voice warm with affection. "I'd like that very much." As Eleanor hung up the phone, she thought about Gerald Thompson and the gift of time she'd given him. Now she was giving herself the same gift, time to nurture the relationships that mattered most. Time to live fully in both her roles as doctor and mother. Time to find the balance she had sought for so long. And it had all begun on Flight 287 to Atlanta, when fate had placed her in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.